tap. Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm joined with Moulana Ashraf Isab, and as you know, the topic for today is what are the biggest challenges facing the youth today. So just a request from Ibrahim Kaka over here. He's saying that, look, if you're subscribed to the YouTube, it's not sufficient to subscribe. If you tap the bell notification, inshallah, then you'll be updated every time Jamia Masjid goes live, etc. Khair, inshallah, we'll get started. We don't want to spend too much time. Again, share this with your friends and your family, etc. If somebody listens and benefits, alhamdulillah, you'll get the reward of that, inshallah. So I am joined with Moulana Ashraf Isab, and we'll get started, inshallah. So most of you will be aware, he studied in Blackburn Darul Uloom, and he graduated from there. It's a seminary in Blackburn, obviously. And thereafter, he's been involved at the moment in, is it Eden? Eden School, I think, is head of year. Am I right? Head of year. And mashallah, he's quite heavily involved with the youth. And so I think that's pretty much where we'll start. Before we actually tackle the main question of today, it's kind of to get to know how did you get involved maybe in youth work as such, or working with the youth, etc. Sorry, we're just sorting out the technical side. Try now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Both up, I'm bred in Preston. I went to Christ the King High School. At the time that we went, there wasn't the best of schools. It was quite rough, in all honesty. And we grew up in a kind of environment where we were learning things very quickly, and things were evolving very quickly. And at that time, Mona Ilyas Desa was the Imam of Jamia when I was in the early years of Christ the King. Alhamdulillah, he was a very big influence on a lot of youth, not just myself. I learned a lot from him, the way he used to interact with the youth, the things he used to do with the youth, and the fikr and the passion he had to help the youth. He gave up a lot of his time. I wouldn't be wrong in saying he gave up most of his time for the youth itself. Progressing into maybe 1 or 2 years later, I joined youth club, the Jamia Masjid Youth Club, where Haji Fayyaz Ali and Haji Mustaq Isab, alhamdulillah, they did a lot of work. They gave a lot of time, their weekends, every Tuesday, every Thursdays. They were very supportive. And I remember at that time in youth club, I used to think to myself that, inshallah, one day I'll be running youth club as well. But inshallah, we still got time. And then moving on after high school, during about that time, Youth in Action opened up, which was founded by Haji Yasin Baks and Haji Fazullah Musab Ismail. And alhamdulillah, they used to let me help out in a lot of things. Started off small, actually. But the key thing was the patience, is that they give me little responsibilities at that time. For example, video tournaments, I used to take things in, take things out, take the scorecards, etc., etc. But eventually, we started giving more and more responsibilities. Alhamdulillah, I got my passion going. Ever since then, it became a passion to help the youth and take over what our elders, I could say, have built for us.
So briefly, what is Youth in Action really?
So Youth in Action is an organization which was set up for youth, I would say 15 onwards. We already had the youth club, which was already for age 11 and 12 onwards. So this was more aimed at 15 or 16 onwards.
So there was this gap where basically...
Yeah. So it was more of a place which they opened up actually in a very I would say in a very clever way. They did it on Friday nights when they knew that a lot of the youth go out. And what they used to do was that they used to open late and open till late as well, so that the youth could come there and they could relax and chill out, I would say, there, rather than going out into towns or etc. somewhere else.
Yeah, because one of the advices we're always giving to the youth is get off the streets or don't do
Get off the
this or
streets,
don't do
yeah.
that. But the problem is, the question is, there's no alternative.
Exactly.
And so Youth in Action was to facilitate this. That
Yeah.
fine, we're telling you to get off the streets. Here's an alternative. So what pretty much goes on at Youth in Action?
I guess the first thing is it's just a place to relax without any without any worries. To be honest, there's some I would say elderly youngsters. I wouldn't call them elders, but you got some bit youngsters that can help them around the age. The people that they would know, maybe even that they might have been in school with. So when they might have been in year 7, they might have the other boys might have been in year 11. So they already knew them. So they can come there, they can relax, they can chill, they can talk about anything they want really. Any questions they have, they can ask openly, freely. We have a few of games, table tennis, PS4 now, etc., etc. So they can relax and chillax at the same time. And then every now and again, we try and do some trips, which gets them, again, if it's not the same thing again and again, it gets them pulling, actually, what, we can benefit from here. And before some trips, we'll have some workshops. So it won't be just like go on a trip, come back, and that's at the end of it. We'll have some workshops across maybe some topic that they want to do, or maybe across a topic that we think is very much needed by them. So they get to learn at the same time of having fun and staying off the streets, and we get to learn from them, and we get to, if they need any help, we can give them some help, as whether that's emotional help, mental health issues, or maybe family, whatever issues they may be facing, they can approach us about that. And mostly, I would say, is building relationships with them. Like we always say that the time that they spend there, that is important, but the most important time is after they leave from there. What they are doing, what they're doing after that is most important for us. If they succeed after that, that's our success as well.
And obviously, I know you keep in touch with all of them, even outside of the Youth in Action hours,
Yes.
etc. That's quite key as well.
It is. It's hard sometimes as well, because when they're not face to face, knowing technology these days, they got plenty of things to do, and you got to give it to the youngsters that they will still text anything, or contact us regarding any issues that they have, any questions they have. In a culture, in a time where they could go to anyone or anywhere, for them to still to approach us, this shows that there's still hope, and not everything is lost, and they still got that connection with us as well, and they are looking for that connection, they're looking for that love as well.
I think a lot of people don't realize how much the Youth in Action as such has given these lads someone to turn to.
Definitely.
Because they wouldn't really turn to a general scholar or something of this sort, but through this interaction,
Yes.
they're much more able to kind of ask their questions or any concerns
It's like
they have.
we kind of put it once, one of our meetings very well recently before the lockdown, is giving the youth a voice, giving them a platform.
Yeah.
A lot of youth, we know as well, we were like that at one time as well. We have a tendency to think that no one cares about me, no one listens to me, no one understands me. But this is a place when they can come actually and say, actually, you know what, I am understood, I am listened to, people do care about me, and they can explore their questions.
So, okay, we've touched on Youth in Action, and it's fair to ask then, with every single kind of endeavor that a person takes, there's always challenges. What would you say are the challenges that you guys are facing with Youth in Action?
Challenges come and go, but I think the biggest challenge we're facing now is the different kinds of places that are available to the youth now. So to explain that, in Youth in Action, obviously they can come there, they can relax. It's in James Street, it's in Al Hidayah Centre. That's the Masalla. So we got games there, we got table tennis, we got Articulate, which is quite a fun game for them to play actually. We got the PS4, etc. We got a bit of pool table, etc. But there's always been another place that will be more, they'll be more intrigued towards, where they'll have the PS4 there, they'll have the pool table there, they can chill and relax there, but then they'll have the music there as well, and they'll have the shishas there, and they might even have girls there, and they can, and it just moves on to other things that they can be exposed to.
Just to
For
clarify,
example,
this isn't in Youth in Action. Yeah, the girls.
no, this is not in Youth in Action. So there are other places apart from Youth in Action, alternatives where they have now getting pulled into.
Yeah.
Because you got Youth in Action where they can play PS4 and pool, but then there's another place as well where they can play PS4 and they can play pool.
It's a lot more glamorous.
But it's a lot more glamorous for them. It's a good way to put it. And they get pulled into that. So they're thinking, should I go to Youth in Action, or can I go there where I've got a lot more options to play with? So that's the biggest challenge we're facing, is that there's never enough. We can never enough to combat those places, whether that's resources, financial resources, just manpower, whatever it may be. We can't combat that at the moment. That's our biggest challenge. Is that we were there, they were all there, but then they found this other place, and now to get them back to this to youth in action again is sometimes proves very, very difficult.
And I think this is where building relationships is important.
Definitely.
If they feel like Youth in Action is their home,
Yes.
like this is our kind of spot, this is where we chill. And so all of these other things might come and go, but they'll always be able to come back to Youth in Action. And I think this is important, that the kind of environment is created within Youth in Action, etc., where the youngsters feel comfortable. No, I can't come here. This is a place that,
That's true. And that reminds me that when Youth in Action was founded, it was founded in Al Hidayah Center for a reason. It was a community building, obviously, at that time. But moving on, even after the Salah started there and it became Masalla, one of the most important things, one of the most amazing things that we found was that it gave the youth an excuse to come into the building. Now, the thing is, the youth are not scared to they're not scared of namaz. They're scared of the building itself because they haven't been in there for such a long time. They're embarrassed to come there. They think, I'm not been in there for a long time, what are people going to say to me? So now when they come to Youth in Action every Friday night, it becomes a second home for some of them, even a first home for them. So now, when it comes to namaz time, they're thinking, well, I go there anyway, it's not any different for me.
Yeah.
So now that persuades them and pushes them to come to namaz as well. And especially in the summer months, where we open up about 9 o'clock, they get Maghrib and Isha there as well. So it kind of, two namazes, even if two namazes out of 5, it's a sort for a lot of them, alhamdulillah. So that is one of the benefits of being there as well.
All right, so let's get on to the actual topic then. The actual question as such is, what are the biggest challenges you are facing in regard to the youth, or what do you think the youth are facing? And I'm assuming, obviously, we'll have to discuss this from a context of Preston,
Yeah.
but that will extend, obviously, generally speaking, the youth are faced with very similar issues.
That's true. Look, there's a lot of issues that we're facing. There's a lot of challenges. Some are older, some are new, some are very new to us. You got issues like you got drugs, you got alcohol, you got gambling, etc., etc. Now those, we've come across them before. To a certain extent, we know how to combat those issues. But I would say the 3 biggest issues that we're facing, or challenges that we're facing now, the 3 biggest challenges we're facing now is number 1, also which we are finding difficult to combat, is gang crime, knife crime. So just to clarify, open up on that, it's become a culture of friendship versus another area, or another area versus someone else, or then there's 2 areas will then team up and go against another area, etc., etc. And it's becoming quite common there. So that's one of the first biggest challenges that we're facing. And it's something new to us. Before we used to hear about, someone might have get into a bit of a scuffle between 1 or 2 people, but now it's becoming a gang crime type of thing. The second one, I would say, is intellectual questioning, maybe, or beliefs. Questions that they've got. For example, they're going to college, moving on from high school, they go to college, they're going to university, they come across a variety of people and they're being questioned about Islam, they're being questioned about their Iman, and the question put to them, because they don't know the answer to those questions, their Iman is being shaken. But they don't realize how easy actually is to combat that. But it's just that because at that time they don't know the answers, their Iman is being shaken, and then they start thinking to themselves, that actually, so is Islam the actual religion? Is my religion the true religion? And the third one is a bit of a sensitive one, but a lot of our youth, whether we accept it or not, are now going into, they ask this question that, what's wrong with me having a relationship or a friendship with the opposite gender? And that's a big one now. Logically understanding that, or even fiqh in the understanding that from an Islam perspective, that's a very big question that we're facing. So I would say those are the 3 biggest challenges that we are facing now
So
from the youth.
Obviously, the first one being a gang culture and all of this kind of thing as such.
Yeah.
You see, down south, this is quite common as well. And from what I've seen, it stems from an understanding of you need a place of belonging.
Yeah.
And you see, if that place of belonging doesn't come from home, you will look for that place of belonging elsewhere. And you'll create your sense of belonging somewhere else. So it might be through these gangs as such. I know he's got my back. And it looks like this really romantic idea. I'm telling you, the amount of individuals who've been into gangs, involved in gangs, who come out of it, and they'll tell you afterwards, oh, it was, and I think one of the biggest benefits, one thing that the community can consider, is trying to find these types of sources, trying to find somebody who's been there, who's been involved in that situation, who's gone through drugs and who's gone through this and who's gone through gang culture and he's seen it tear families apart. That's what happens. You know, somebody comes and they think that they're cool, carrying a knife, etc., and then they end up using the knife, and it just, you don't realize the consequences of your actions. It takes you 10 seconds to pull the knife out and do something, but that 10 seconds then translates into 10 years of turmoil for you. And this is something that many people don't realize. And they're looking for these kind, and I don't know, this is where things like Youth in Action are so important, where you're bringing them off the streets, but now it's a case of now bringing these types of people forward, I think. Putting people into to have these kind of conversations with them, to bring them into Youth in Action, etc., and to have a real conversation with them. But what's your ideas about what gang culture really is? Because in London, I can tell you, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess, and this is just how it is. And if it's not curbed now, if it's not taken care of now, it'll only escalate.
No, you're right, because right now we're still at the beginning of this. It's something new to us, like I mentioned.
Yeah, at the moment, it's unorganized.
And you're right, it's something. It's so easy to take a weapon out and use it. And we've seen ourselves in the few cases that we have come across, is that some youngsters have done that, but the moment they've done that, they've regretted it straight away, and they're panicking now. That what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And it's you know, when that adrenaline is there, to use that weapon is very, very easy. And I guess it comes down to peer pressure as well, that you've got a group of 20 of your boys around there, and you're thinking that no one can touch me, no one can do anything to me, it's fine, I get away with anything, everything right now, and you feel invincible at that time, and you got that tool on, you got that weapon on you, and then they end up using that, and then the moment, literally 5 or 10 minutes later after everything's ended, it's instant regret that what have I done, and you're constantly looking over your back. I remember someone, I think it was in high school, that someone mentioned, and like you mentioned, that it was one of these guys that came in, and he was an ex gang member, and he said that when you start getting into this culture, for the rest of your life, you end up looking over your shoulder because you don't know who might come back to get revenge on you.
100%. And this is something, youngsters specifically, if you are listening, this is something you take seriously. That I'm telling you, your life is not worth gambling away. The risk that is involved in getting involved in a gang, it seems cool, it seems like the hip thing to do, but the harm that comes out of this for you as an individual, the consequences you have to live with, not somebody else is going to kind of shoulder that responsibility for you. I think the second challenge you kind of touched on was, again, it's a very common one, intellectual doubts, questions in regard from a secular perspective. And to be honest, we expect these kind of challenges. You see, the West especially, Europe, America, Canada, these places, generally speaking, they are very secular societies. And so we shouldn't be surprised that these are the kind of questions that are being asked. These are very liberal spaces, especially at universities. This is where you question everything. You ask why about everything. I think there are two issues in this regard, and this is something which needs to be tackled, and we can look into that. Issue number one is there's an inferiority complex. And I don't mean amongst youngsters only. I'm talking amongst even adults in our ummah. Guaranteed, if you think about this, the amount of times you've maybe been somewhere, or you've been you've dressed in a certain way, or you've had a beard or something, and you've just felt conscious of it. Do I want to go with my beard? Do I want to go with my jubbah? Do I want to go with my Islamic identity? And so the first thing I think is the inferiority complex. An inferiority complex stems from one place, which is a lack of knowledge on the religion. If you don't know what your religion is and what you're standing for and what Islam teaches you, then the chances of you folding under pressure are immense. If somebody says to you, for example, there's this verse of the Quran which says this, your inferiority complex will come in and you say, no, you're misinterpreting it or this and that, and you'll have no answer, and you'll kind of say, look, I don't know, ask a scholar or something like that. But that doubt has been placed in your mind. Now the question is this: how many youngsters will go and take that question and take it to a scholar or take it to somebody and say, somebody asked me this question, I need an answer. I need to know what the answer is. And so the inferiority complex in regard to our religion stems from a lack of learning and a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding. And you can only fix the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding by connecting yourself to those who are of understanding, those who have studied the religion, right? And the avenues for a person to study are so many avenues now for a person to study. If they can't study from their local scholars online, there's this, there's that. There's so many avenues that a person can study. And I think that's one of the main things. That's one of the main things in regard to that second chapter. I don't know if you've come across anything in this regard in terms of the doubts that people have in terms from an intellectual perspective.
The thing is, well, we've come across a variety of students. We've come across, for even like you mentioned, it's not just the youth. We do have elderly people as well that are, coming across these questions. Now they might come across it on some TV channel that they're watching somewhere, even if it's like from an Asian channel, whatever it may be. They're watching something and it comes across, and the iman starts shaking up. Actually, I've just heard that, I've seen that, I've seen this, I've seen that. Now, I know part of our youth work, when we had a bit of a training session with Haji Yasin Bucks, he mentioned a very good point to us, that he goes, sometimes it's the quiet ones that are sitting in the houses on the internet, and they're never around, they never
That call will basically be Zahid. He just already said, okay, Allah is gonna. Just ignore it. Back. Someone's saying sounds on.
Is he on? Let's see.
Somebody's just said that on the thing. Yeah, he's back?
Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just take it on to the third one. What was the third one, Ashraf?
I know what's happening.
third question was regarding a question that youth ask, that what is wrong with me having a friendship or a relationship with someone with the opposite gender.
All right, okay. So this is now, look, this is a big one. So listen, if there's youngsters listening, share this with your friends, because this is a big one that we get asked a lot of the time, right? The question as such is, many youngsters always ask this question: why can't we interact with the opposite gender? We're only being friends. I'm keeping a safe distance, etc. Why can't we interact with them? And so, do we want the comprehensive answer, or do we want the kind of short answer here?
I think we should go the comprehensive. It's a big issue. So I
Okay.
think we should do a comprehensive answer.
Look, here's the thing, right? A lot of the time, even in my studies, I've always looked for these answers from an Islamic perspective, from an intellectual perspective, and until you're not convinced, you keep looking, and so inshallah this will be a very detailed answer. And honestly, look, the only reason I'm going to go into this level of detail is because I genuinely believe that there's youngsters who are from an intellectual perspective and they're thinking with their minds and they deserve a proper answer. And that's why I'm going to go into some detail. So, look, we need to look at what's the boundaries on male-female interaction as such. Okay? And we're going to look at it from a Western perspective, specifically us living in the UK. And there's a number of academics who also discuss this. So, look, I'm going to go on a bit of a strange tangent here, but you've got to trust me and you've got to focus on the entire conversation. We have had relatively reliable and relatively safe birth control since the 1950s or the 1960s, right? This is important. Birth control was actually a massive game changer when it comes to male-female interaction, especially in the workplace. Why, you might ask? Well, if you were a woman before the 60s, then you had one of two options. You focus on building a family, or you focus on building your career. And you couldn't really do both, right? I'll explain why. The problem is, if you focused on your career, marriage was extremely difficult. We're talking in the 60s, right? Because the husband wanted somebody to take care of the children, take care of the domestic duties, whilst he took care of the financial duties. This was the kind of compromise that was agreed, right? So now let's assume you're focused on your career. You end up you focus on your career. You're not focused on family life. What happens? You end up having promiscuous relationships outside of marriage. You're going to now go into relationships outside of marriage, and you're going to get pregnant. But you didn't have birth control. And well, you didn't have the option of abortion back in the 60s because of the medical complications, and there was extreme societal pressure. The entire society is going to put pressure on you. So what happens? You basically lose your job in the 60s and you raise a child alone. So the question is, if that's either the route you're going to take or you're going to get married. And so most women would actually prefer to marry, and they became stay-at-home mums. That was the easy option in the 60s. Now, the early 60s arrive and birth control comes about. You got to focus, because this is, inshallah, it will answer the thingy for the listeners. I'm not on a random tangent, I promise. The early 60s arrive and birth control now comes about. Now, it's the first time in history, or in the history of human existence, women are now free from involuntary reproduction. This has never happened on the history of the planet. And you now have control over whether you have a child or not. So how do we react to birth control in the 60s? Well, we go all out, because that's what we do as humans. We get involved in all sorts of promiscuous sexual intercourse. There's no consequences anymore, right? So it's perfect. We can have relationships outside of marriage and outside of responsibility, or as we call it today, no strings attached, no responsibilities attached. Well, the question is, how did that go? It didn't go very well, actually. It caused massive issues in the family structure. It made life difficult for children. AIDS came about, right? STDs, especially when the STDs were mutating, and that's how viruses work. They're extremely tricky to control. So we don't want to go into the family structure conversation. So fine, the birth control pill now exists. So what? What's the big deal? Well, now that women have control over involuntary reproduction, they can now come into the workplace without having to worry about a family structure. And so women start entering the workplace in much greater confidence. We're talking now after the 60s. And so I'm talking from the Western perspective here, right? And so for the first real time in the West, we are now seeing more instances of male-female interaction in the workplace. And by the way, 1960s to now, it's what, 80 years? That's not a long time. That's not a long time. So what's the rules? What's the boundaries? What do we class as too far? We don't know. We've not specified anything. We think it's all okay. And one of the biggest things that gave me clarity in this regard was the hashtag #MeToo movement. What happens is the hashtag #MeToo movement breaks out. there is absolute chaos in Hollywood, and now people start talking about boundaries and limits. So what's the limits, right? So one of the things I found interesting, Ashraf, is people are asking, is a handshake okay? Okay, fine. What about a hug? What about a kiss on the cheek? What's the boundary? And so some people come out and they say, okay, look. The main thing is consent. That's the universal rule. Okay, fine, that makes sense. So if they are consenting and I'm consenting, that should be okay, fine. But what kind of consent? So some people say you need verbal consent. So for example, you're interacting with male, female, and you go to shake the hand, and they say yes, that's fine. So now people say verbal consent is fine. And so that's what you'll find at Princeton University in America, for example. They issued instructions that you need to obtain consent on the dance floor. What that means is you have to ask, is it okay if I dance with you? Right? But that's not enough. Beyond merely asking, do you want to dance, and waiting for an affirmative response, students were then instructed to frequently, every now and then, ask again, are you still into this? Or am I okay to carry on dancing? These kind of awkward interactions taking place. So now some people are arguing that that's one side. Some people are saying verbal consent. Some people then started arguing, no, you need signed consent before any physical moves. Like, really? Can you imagine two individuals in the moment, and somebody pulls out a contract and says, can you sign this for consent? It sounds like they're getting permission to go on a school trip, right? CNN Business, they published an article last year on the 5-step guide to giving hugs at work. In 2019, there are certain, I'm quoting now from the actual article, it said in 2019, there are certain things, including physical acts like hugging, that we shouldn't be doing anymore. That was mentioned by Mike Schmidt, and he's an employment attorney at Cozen O'Connor law firm in New York City. He said it's just not worth the risk. Right, so some people are now saying, fine, you need consent on hugs and stuff like that. NBC, the television network, they made rules saying no hugging at all in the workplace. You cannot hug in the workplace. Other places came out with a 2-second rule. The hug should last for 2 seconds. Some places came out with, there's all sorts of rules, only shoulder-to-shoulder hugs. Right? Bloomberg, they published a Wall Street article for the #MeToo era, which was titled, Avoid Women at All Costs. And I'm quoting from the article. The line at the first line was, no more dinners with female colleagues, don't sit next to them on flights, book hotel rooms on different floors, avoid one-on-one meetings. And I'm sat there thinking, what is this, Sharia law or something? And this is Bloomberg article, Wall Street article. You see what the problem is? What is consent? And who defines consent? So some people try to simplify it. They say, why are you making it complicated, man? Consent is simple. When party A is willing and party B is willing, it's consent. When this person says it's okay and that person says it's okay, it's consent. Two consenting individuals, simple. But then you start asking, really? No other conditions? They say, yeah, no other conditions. So you ask, what about a child and an adult? What if they're both consenting? They say, no, that's not okay. No, not children. Oh, so it's not just consent. There's more rules to it. What if the person consenting is drunk? If I'm asking permission and they're drunk, no, that's not consent, because they're not in a position to give consent. Okay, what if they give you consent, they become drunk? Do you have to now seek consent a second time? And so you'll very quickly realize that when it comes to something of this sort, it's not simple, it's very complex. Male-female interaction in the West is very complex. And that's something which is understood. The reason I have to say that is because when youngsters ask, well, why can't I just be friends, etc., it's not as simple as that. So what's the Islamic solution to male-female interaction? And here's what Islam says. You've got, as you can see, the West right now is in absolute turmoil. They're trying to work out how male and female should interact. And so here's the thing. When it comes to verbal interaction or spoken interactions, so long as you remain professional and it remains verbal, then it's fine. For example, you're in school with teachers, students, you're at work with colleagues in your team. If you keep it formal and you keep it professional, there's no issue in that. You're keeping it business related, work related, school related. And we see this in the life of Khadija radiallahu anha. She was a businesswoman. She hired the Prophet, peace be upon him. There was clear verbal interaction taking place. Otherwise, how would the business have functioned? But what was the overriding principle? Verbal interactions are fine so long as it's professional and formal. That's the main thing. And it's pretty common sense, let's be honest. And every person knows when they've gone beyond the limit. That extra emoji you send, or that little smiley face that you send, or that little, where the limit is. You don't need somebody to spell it out for you. It's common sense. Now, that's verbal interactions. What about physical interactions? Well, here's the question. Your physical interaction is completely okay in a situation of absolute necessity. Look, you're in the street, a female is injured, you interact to the extent of your necessity, you help a person out. But anything beyond that, anything beyond the necessity, it's a no. And that's simple. And you can either take it from the Prophet ﷺ, or you could take it from the Bloomberg article. Avoid women at all costs, and no more dinners with female colleagues. Don't sit with them, next to them on flights. Book hotel rooms on different floors. Avoid one-on-one meetings. That's pretty much what Islam is saying. And this is the main thing. What do we learn from this? If we try to take a man-made approach to something as complex as male-female interaction, it gets messy, and it gets messy very, very quickly. Everybody has a different opinion. What Islam comes to do is it provides a universal solution. And that is of benefit to the male in society, and it protects the honor of the male from accusation or blame, but it also benefits and protects the female, and it protects her honor, and it leaves her chastity unaffected. And so that leaves one final question. That everybody's discussing consent. What is consent? What is consent? So what is consent for a Muslim? And the reason I'm going into detail is because youngsters ask this question in regard to relationships. And the consent for a Muslim, the consent for a believer is simple. Marriage. It's a written and signed consent. But subhanAllah, it's so much better than the written consent in the West. Because the written consent in the West allows you to have sexual relations with each other, and then it's finished. Islam treats humans with a little more dignity. Once you have exchanged this written consent, it doesn't just mean you're allowing for sexual interaction, but you're also taking responsibility for any consequence of that sexual interaction. If we have kids, we share in that responsibility. I don't abandon you on the doorstep of society that you become somebody else's charity work. No, we work through this together as a family. And subhanAllah, this is the system Islam provides. The problem is, and I say this to the youth over and over again, the problem is we don't break it down. And we don't think about these things. We're too excited because of our desires and our nafs. It's out of control. So everything crazy going on around us makes sense. But, why shouldn't it make sense? It's the 21st century, right? This is the advanced way of approaching things. And so that was specifically for the youth. Yani, these are just some thoughts that I'm still developing, but I thought I'd share, inshallah. As far as I understand, yani, this is, obviously it's not a relationship talk, but it's very, very important for the youth to understand this. That from an Islamic perspective, from a Western perspective, it makes absolute sense why we have to curb that male-female interaction. And humans aren't made for this, Ashraf, to just go into one relationship, out of another, into another relationship, out of another. That's just not how we're created, Sorry, I just went on.
No, you're right. The amount of times in the past, probably 1 or 2 years, a youngster has come to me and he's absolutely serious that this is the absolute right person for me. Let's say we've decided I want to marry her, I want to do this, I want to do that, and then you ask them 2 months down the line, they say, that all went down the drain. You start,
100%.
And he's just like, it's like you're saying to him that I told you so.
Yeah.
And it's not as hard. You can't say that.
You have to kind of.
And it's like you said, it's a culture, and we can't fully blame the youngsters for this. It's the kind of society they live in, and it's something which is so normal in our society these days that they just get dragged into it, and it's not as complicated as we think actually is. It's a lot more simpler. Like you mentioned, you just have to break it down. Sit down with the right people and tell them to break it down for me and have a bit of a better understanding.
Yeah, as you know, we've gone off on relationships and stuff, but this is really important for youth to understand that you don't go and start interacting with a girl and then getting emotionally attached to this girl, and then suddenly after 3 years of getting emotionally attached, you then turn around and say, I want to get married to this girl and stuff. You have to appreciate that the parents are thinking, what's going on here? There's a way to go about these things. You don't go getting emotionally invested and then turning up to your parents and saying, right, well, the marriage is going to take place and this is how it's going to be and this is what's going to happen. Because the majority of the time what happens is it doesn't last. And I'll tell you, one of the things I've noticed, I'll give you an example. When I was doing one of the Q&As in London, somebody asked this question, that why does Islam only allow kind of a couple of interactions with the girl? You just get to meet the girl, ask a few questions, and that's it. How am I supposed to marry somebody for the rest of my life and I only get to do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 interactions with them? And even that's with like other people present in the room or something of that sort. And the simple answer to this, it's so simple. If you spend 2 years getting to know somebody, right? So let's say there's a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. You're in a relationship of a boyfriend-girlfriend. Let's say you're going out for 2 years properly. When do you go out? You go out when you're dressed up, looking the best. You've got a good amount of money in your pocket. You're going to do something you enjoy. It's going to be either cinema, or it's going to be bowling, or it's going to be this, or it's going to be somewhere that you're going to have fun. Every single one of your experiences with this individual was in your best clothes, with a good amount of money to spend, and it was you and her or you and him going to have some fun. And so every single relationship and every single interaction with this person is going to be the best interactions of your life. Not only that, every single text message that you send is going to be all lovey-dovey, pink fluff conversations. And I'm telling you, you can date a person for 2 years. You won't get to know the serious stuff about this person. Like the questions that matter. Things like children. How many children do you want to have? What aspirations do you have for our children? What's your objectives in life? Or, in 10 years time, where do you see yourself? And all of the questions that really matter. And this is one of the biggest issues, that you're in this bubble, and scholars mention this as well, that you can only appreciate somebody in 2 instances. Number 1, traveling with them, and number 2, sleeping under the same roof as them. You won't get to know this person. You think you do. You've spent 2 years with them. I'm telling you, you can spend 5 years with a person. Until you don't move in, you don't get to know that person. You don't get to know that person. And this is important for the youth to understand, that you're just going to put yourself through so much hassle. You will go through these phases. Yes, these are natural phases, but start becoming serious. And I say this to youngsters, and I say this, I mean well. Start becoming serious with your parents. Meaning, when the conversation comes up about marriage, don't laugh it off and say, yeah, inshallah. No, when you need to get married and you want to get married, have that conversation properly with your parents. But guess what? If you're not going to be responsible as an adult, as a human, don't expect them to turn around and say, okay, get married. Because they're going to say to you, well, you don't have a job, you don't have this, you don't have that. You've got to show them that you're becoming something more than somebody who's just willing to play video games and do this and do that. And it brings some responsibility. And a lot of the time, people are saying to the youth that, no, be nice on them. I'm telling you, youngsters, take some responsibility. It's the best thing that you can do for yourself. Take responsibility of your actions, and I'm telling you, inshallah, it'll be it will cause benefit for you, inshallah. I don't know the amount of times, like you're saying as well, youngsters come up to you and they ask you these questions on relationships, and they say, oh, I found this girl, she's the perfect girl, and they paint this amazing picture, and a few months down the line, it's over. It's like, and you're like, I spent all this time speaking to you and you didn't listen to me, and then you learned the hard way. And the human being isn't made for this. The human being isn't made to go through relationship after relationship after relationship. That's not how we are. Bil Bakhair. Any other thoughts on the youth, etc.? And look, alhamdulillah, in the West, we are very, very lucky that we have the opportunities that we have in terms of our parents moved here with the financial kind of focus, the economic growth in mind. Allah has given us that. Allah hasn't held back from the economic growth for the Muslims in the UK. The question now is a spiritual and really important. What you touched on, there's only 2 issues with the entire ummah today. One is a spiritual one, and one is an intellectual one. Spiritual is the heart, and your connection to Allah, you're learning the religion. And the second is the intellectual one. It's to do with the brain. People asking questions about Islam, people asking this, people asking that, and that's one of the courses we actually started delivering in Jamia, the Takmila course, and that was the entire objective of that. On the Wednesdays, we'd focus on the intellectual side of stuff, so rationally proving God and going through, rationally proving prophethood and what's the need of religion and all of these things. And so these were like, I'm talking Haidar and these
Haidar Abdullah, Zahid Salih and them guys.
So they were year 9, year 10, I think. Would go through complex discussions of cosmological argument, teleological argument, absolutely watered it down and presenting it to them that thinking Yeah, I've got it. So in that regard, all of these kind of discussions, and then on the Friday, Moulana Ahmad Bucks, phenomenal. He would do the spiritual side of
Yes.
stuff, and I'm telling you, he'd go through tafsir of Surah Yusuf, so it's interacting with the Quran. They would get practice on the Quran recitation, all of these things. Even in London, we kind of started this, and this is the kind of direction that we need to go. Can Mulsab write or give reference to an article that contains the points you just mentioned? Yeah, if you go on Google, literally, if you just type in Bloomberg, Wall Street article, #MeToo era. Literally, if you type that in, you'll find it. You'll find it. Look, I'll type it now. Bloomberg, what do they say? Bloomberg, Wall Street, #MeToo. Yeah, it's the first one. It's the first one that comes up, written by Gillian Tan and Katia Poshanshansky or something like that. Yeah. So you can basically.
Just put a message on so it's on.
Oh, yeah,
It's a good point that you just mentioned. I was thinking about the same thing that when you mentioned the Takmila class. So that was a class that you ran for after the boys left madrasa.
Yeah.
I think that's a very, very important factor. That the reason so many of our youth are now struggling is because after they're leaving madrasa, it's like a full stop, and it's at the end of the studies, it's the end of everything. And if they kept up that connection, or I would even say if the youth kept that connection, if the responsible people, we kept that connection with them, then we can still teach them, and they can still come to us to get their knowledge as well. Whereas what happens now, it's like a full stop after madrasa. There's no moving forward after madrasa. So now that's another thing as a community we need to concentrate on, and even as a masjid, as a madrasa, and to concentrate on that. What do we do for our youth, boys and girls, for after they leave madrasa?
Yeah, but let's be absolutely realistic. What Islamic education does any person really endeavor on? I'm talking about the 99% of Muslims after madrasa. After madrasa, it's maybe the bayans that you attend, and the majority of bayans are there to kind of give you shawq and to kind of give you this kind of zeal to do good deeds. But in terms of learning the religion, understanding the religion, taking it to a deeper level, maybe studying Arabic or maybe studying the ahadith or going through these kind of discussions, like what really is there? And so this is where we as a community need to come together and take this more seriously and ask these questions, that when my youngster, my young boy or my young girl, they finish from madrasa, right? What are they ready to face university? Are they ready to face the world as such? And I'm not just talking intellectually. Intellectually is one small issue that the Muslims have, right? Because you can tackle, I've noticed this in London, you tackle 2-3 of the intellectual issues, and they'll basically start realizing that, the answers are present.
Yeah.
And then there comes a point where they'll say, why do I have to keep going to this scholar for them to tell me the answers? Maybe I need to take my religion more seriously.
Yeah.
And they'll start studying. And then they'll start studying more seriously under scholars, etc. In these regards. This is somebody saying, Jazakallah, but more tailored to youth in our situation regarding falling in love, etc. Anything available in that regard? Regarding falling in love, I don't understand the question. Moulana Ashraf. Huh? Ibrahim Kaka saying
Famous story, all your master.
Ibrahim Kaka saying Layla and Majnun. Read the story of Layla and Majnun.
I feel become clear.
No, look, obviously, there is obviously, this would require an actual course.
Yeah.
I say this a lot. A lot of these topics require an actual course. See, the chunk that I've discussed regarding relationships and all of that, that's one part of this religion, meaning male-female interaction. And this now, a Muslim should be able to stand with confidence and say, why is there these male-female interaction boundaries in Islam? You can now, instead of going defensive and saying, and coming out with some ridiculous argument like, it's because of this or because of that, you can say with some confidence that, hey, the West is having the same issues. The West is having the same conversations.
Yeah.
They're saying that you can do this or you can't do this or you can do that. And, this is something we're all struggling with. Islam's given us a universal set of laws. But I don't know, always ends with relationships. It always ends with somebody asking a question like, "Can we do undercover nikahs or something like?"
It's like you mentioned. It's like you mentioned that you either take it from, like you mentioned, Bloomberg, or you take it from the Prophet.
Of course.
The Prophet, alhamdulillah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's given us the answers to everything.
It's so important. It's so important. Yani, when we say it's from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's from Allah Himself.
Yeah.
And you know, when you buy a Dyson Hoover or a vacuum or something like this, you don't ask I don't know, Dell, the company Dell or Acer or Windows to tell you how to function the Dyson. You look at the instruction manual of Dyson. If Allah is the creator of the human being and He gives us the instruction manual from the Quran and the Hadith, then why would we turn to anybody else for our understanding of the human being?
Definitely.
And our personal progress? But again, there might be youngsters listening who might have doubts, who might have questions, and this is one of the things that I say too, that Allah has blessed us, every single one of us, with Iman, and these doubts and these questions, they're not something abnormal in the time that we're living in. They're not something strange in the time that we're living in. It's expected, but do something about it. Don't let it be that you let it fester, and then on the day of judgment you stood before Allah and you don't have anything to say. Study the religion, come to the scholars, come to students of knowledge, become students of knowledge, inshallah. And again, push the people around you, push your scholars to give you the content that you need. So yesterday we had the discussion on the kalam. Somebody wanted to learn about kalam, etc. So now you got to sit with the scholars and say, look, we want an aqidah course. Now this conversation on love and relationships, etc. Push the scholars, say that, look, can we do something on relationships, etc.
Definitely.
The classical scholars have talked about all of these things in so much detail. I always say that learn Arabic and you've basically made your life a little bit easier, and you can cut straight to the source under the guidance of scholars, inshallah. So obviously the discussion was in regard to the youth and stuff, and you did mention youth in action. So I guess maybe two questions that I'll ask you in that regard is, what would you say to any youth listening in regard to, so youth in action is based in where? James Street?
James Street, yeah, Hidayah Center.
When does it take place?
Right now we're doing every Friday night, apart from Ramadan only. So for the entire Friday nights, 9 o'clock till late, I would say.
They can come.
They can come at any time.
And they can leave.
Majority of the times we probably close around earliest 12 o'clock. But if there are youth there and they want to stay for a while longer, maybe they want to have someone want to have one-on-one conversations, then they're more than welcome to stay. Alhamdulillah, we do have a variety of other youths there as well that are willing to help out. They volunteers, mashallah, they do really they work really hard as well. So yeah, every Friday nights, 9 o'clock.
Big props to the masjid as well for allowing something like
definitely.
this.
We got alhamdulillah, we got a lot of support from Jama mashallah, from the committee. Alhamdulillah, I don't think they've ever said no to anything for us. Alhamdulillah, they're always willing to help us out in anything that we're doing. But for the youth, yeah, every Friday nights, whatever time, however long you want to pop in, more than welcome.
Take a look. There's no harm in coming, and the easiest way is get your boys. You get a few of the boys together and go take a look, inshallah. And I think that's for the youth. What would you say to the community? What advice or what request is there for the community in this regard?
Look, in terms of the community, I think number one, we have to come to terms with the issues that we have. We have to accept the issues that we have. But number two, I think it's not just a one-man thing. There's no one-man solution. It's not just something which Youth in Action can deal with. It's not just something we can solve as a one person, as a small team. I think we have to work as a community. We've come together as a community, and we work together as a community as well. Number one, for the youth, I would say, look, no one hates you, no one looks down upon you, etc. You have, like Mufti Aamir mentioned, you have to take your responsibility as well. You have to show that I'm being responsible. You have to come forward as well. But again, to the community, that we have to work together. Show the youth, help the youth wherever they may be, whatever they may be doing. For those elders that may have some experiences in this, come forward as a help us out. Even if you don't have any experiences, you come forward and volunteer in all the projects that we have. Whether that's the masjid projects, it's a youth event, whatever events that we have, come and support us, and inshallah, you might have some sort of quality, some sort of benefit that you can give to them, and if that even changes the life of one youth, then inshallah that's our hereafter sorted inshallah. But probably the thing I would say is work together. And whatever issues that we have, if we combat them together, then inshallah we'll be successful and we will see a much brighter future for our youth.
I think one last thing I'll touch on, especially from my experiences in London, is I think the community does need to have a much bigger concern for the girls. You've mentioned this to me as well, Ashraf. Some of the lads have said to you very clearly that often it's the girls who are a bigger issue than the guys. And I say this with extreme seriousness to parents and the community itself, that unless we do not create safe spaces for the young women of this ummah, we're going to be in a very, very difficult situation. You see, the conversation is always directed towards the young lads and the men, etc. In London, one of the things that we've done is local sisters, they come together, maybe some of the appas. It doesn't have to be an appa, somebody who's some sort of religiosity in them. They come together and they're holding certain sessions for the young girls. Maybe it could be some sort of, I don't know, one of the things we did in London, what was it? We did like, they come and they do their face masks and all of these things, and they basically just, do skin exfoliation, I don't know, all this stuff.
Beauty stuff.
Yeah, exactly, beauty stuff. And the young girls come and it gives them role models. You see, they see these appas or they see these women in the community and it gives them a role model. And that's one massive thing that girls lack. They don't have role models. And if you don't give them role models, they will go on YouTube and they will pick up a role model who's doing X, Y, and Z. And that will be their focus. And we have to create these safe spaces for the young girls in this ummah as well. It's very, very important, very, very important. There's just a few questions, Ashraf. Shall we?
Well, just reading the questions, it's like the parental thing that you mentioned, support from the parents. That is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
For the boys, and you mentioned an extremely good point for the girls, but for the boys and the girls, parental support is extremely important. Whether it be in terms of supporting, if the son or if the daughter is doing something, if they have an issue and they find it difficult to address it, then by all means they can approach us. They can approach any responsible person, even if you don't feel comfortable coming to the young ones. If you feel comfortable going to the imams, then go and approach them and discuss your issues with them. That can help master, and inshallah we will do our best to address those issues. And you never know, you might come to us with an issue which you think might just be for your own child, but and when we address that, it might benefit other boys and other girls as well. And all that reward at the end of the day will all come down to yourself. So to parents, I would say that don't hold back. If you have issues, then do approach us, and inshallah we will do what we can as well from our side.
This kind of channel of communication between the masjid and the parents and the community needs to open up, and this is something which is important. The parents need to come to the masajid and speak to the masjid and say that this is what we want, and that's one of the things we did in London as well. Not only do we have the annual general meeting where people can come and voice their opinions, but we started doing what we called I can't remember what the word was. I think it was town hall or something like that. Yeah, we did town hall, and so basically anybody within the community can come forward, like you have at councils and stuff like that. They can come and voice their concerns. They can come and voice their twice a year. Anybody can come in town hall. You ask the questions that you want, and the way we set it up is the committee, the management, the imams, everybody was sat, and we had nothing to hide. So we were accountable to the community. There's a question here, not fully related, but inshallah, how do you demonstrate the experiential experience of Islam, since it's individually personal when the world is thoroughly materialistic, seeing that Islam is spirit and intellect combined? I've noticed Abu Abdullah, mashallah, quite a few questions even yesterday as well. Experiential experience of Islam. So he's basically saying that, look, there are experiences you get in Islam. So for the sweetness of Iman, when you're performing Salah, you feel a connection to Allah. How do you present that? Let me tell you one of the things. Experiential experiences and anecdotes are for the personal self. That's something very, very important. If you've tasted a mango and you say to somebody, taste this mango, and you say, well, what does it taste like? You say it's sweet, but I'm telling you, it's the best thing I've ever tasted. That you can only convey that if you have a relationship with this person. And so your anecdote and your personal experience is for yourself. And the reason I say this, you can't use this as evidence in a conversation. I'll tell you why. Because there are Christians who have experiential, kind of experiences of Islam. There are Jewish people from the Jewish community who've had this. There are Buddhists who've had this. So experiences as such are limited to your personal self. The intellectual conversations is then what comes out. You see, when you go through the Quran, you'll see that the Quran does combine the two. And you made a very, very good point there. That Islam is spirit and intellect combined. Islam combines the two, spirituality and intellect. And that's what myself and Ashraf mentioned. That's one of those are the only two issues that everybody in this ummah faces. It's either a spiritual one, something to do with the heart, or it's an intellectual one, something to do with the mind. And so a spiritual one, those challenges which are to do with the heart, those are more personal. And so for you to say that, oh, I experienced this in my tahajjud, you can't really use that as an evidence. However, the intellectual ones, and that's what Allah says, that what is multiple gods better or is one God better? Yani that's how these are the kind of rational conversations Allah talks about. That how many prime ministers do you have? You have one prime minister, unless it's obviously khair. But
hung parliament.
Yeah, exactly, hung parliament, all of this stuff. But even then, any one person will be making the decisions. If you have one person saying I want rain and one person saying you want sunlight, it's going to cause havoc. So Allah does go through these intellectual discussions as well, and you'll find that from the classical scholars as well. Imam Abu Hanifa would have these arguments which kind of indicate towards the cosmological argument. He would say that, oh, do you not see that the dung of the camel indicates to the camel, etc. All of these different things. What advice would you give to an individual youth that has friends that listen to music, talk to the other gender, etc., and they want them to stop? What approach could they take, or should they cut ties? Sheikh Ashraf.
Look, I'm not a big fan of cutting ties. The reason being is relationships sooner or later comes into play, and it helps a lot. Never cut ties with someone. If you want to distance yourself, like I mentioned last week, that if you think that by helping someone you're going to get dragged into it yourself, then for a while you should distance yourself until you can build it up. But once you know that I've got the ability to help someone and I won't get dragged into it myself, then help them. But don't cut ties with them, because sooner or later you'll be able to help them, and those relationships is very, very important factor.
Very, 100%. Somebody sent me a video just earlier regarding Nouman Ali Khan.
Okay.
And how he came onto Islam, meaning how he became religious. There's an individual in London, Dr. Yassin. He sends me a lot of this stuff, and it was basically Nouman Ali Khan was questioning Islam. He had doubts and all of these things, and he went to an MSA at the university or something like that, and he built a friendship with this Muslim youngster. Nouman Ali Khan would always complain about Islam to him, this youngster, and he would always say, oh, Islam's like this, I don't understand this, and that youngster would just keep listening. He wouldn't say a word. He was a pious religious individual, and they were both at university, so he'd just keep listening. So khair, he's always saying, what happened once is they were driving, and the youngster got off and said that, look, I'm just going to perform my salah. Do you mind if I go and perform my salah? Nouman Ali Khan said, no problem. And what happened was, Nouman Ali Khan thought, I might as well join him. So notice, he didn't say to him, hey, you need to pray or do this.
Force him.
I'm going to pray my salah. You come in? So he joined him. As soon as he went for salah, Nouman Ali Khan mentions this himself. He goes, I performed the salah and I'd missed 3 rakat. I didn't know anything about Islam. I didn't even know you have to stand up if you missed a rakat and stuff like that. Like, can you imagine from what a stage he must have been at?
Yeah.
And he's just performed salah behind the imam, and he's done the salam after missing 3 rakat. And you're just thinking to yourself, wow, man, subhanallah, that's mental. And then he basically then sees everybody else standing up, so he just stands up with them and kind of thing. From there, he goes, that salah that I experienced, he goes, I felt something in that. And so he goes, then I went back and I started studying. And this is what distinguishes the people with doubts to the people becoming like other Nouman Ali Khans and other scholars and students.
Definitely.
But he then went and took his religion seriously. Abu Abdullah, notice, it was a personal experience that caused him this. It was as you mentioned, experiential experience. But now it's using that experiential experience to now go and study the religion and deeper and understand
definitely.
it. And then he went and all of this reward will be on this one individual. Now notice, if you cut ties, how are you going to have these interactions? Yes, if your iman and your religion is at risk, then you consider cutting ties. If there is harm to you and there's harm to your religion and it's at your detriment, then you step back and you disengage. However, if you feel that I can interact with this individual in a limited capacity, I don't have to go out with him every single night. I don't have to, but there are times that I can go out with this individual. Then I can cause some benefit, and I won't say to him, "Hey, you need to perform your salah." Say, "Listen, I'm going for salah. If you're coming, jump in or something like that, etc." But it's gradual. Look, everybody finds the religion at a different stage, and if we're living in a utopian world where everything is perfect, yes, everybody would be performing 5 times salah and everything. But there are people who get on this journey at a different stage, and and like Moulana Ashraf said, perfect, that don't cut ties if you can cause some benefit. I would have agreed with you 100%. I do agree with you 100% on that. Ala kullin, it's a lot of the time people, Allah just switches the hearts. Uzair is just telling me now to mention that the life of Umar radiallahu anhu.
Yeah, definitely.
He's there going to assassinate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yep.
And it's just what happens on the way, and Allah, grants them iman, etc. It's all in the hands of Allah. Khair, inshallah, it's 106. I think we wrap it up there, inshallah.
Inshallah.
I think with all the challenges that the youth face, I think it's fair to say that let's end on a positive note. There is a lot of work taking place, alhamdulillah, especially
Definitely.
in this locality, with the youth in action and stuff like that. Moulana Ashraf, and he's mentioned a number of other people like Haji Yasin Bucks and all these other individuals that are a part of it. May Allah accept all their efforts.
Ameen.
And let's try and support it in whatever way we can. And as a community, take this religion seriously and have expectations, in regard to our community, that we portray Islam to our youth in the way it needs to be portrayed. Don't be, as Muslims, never be satisfied and happy with mediocrity. We're not a mediocre nation. We're not a mediocre people. We push things to the limit. And so if this is where you guys take seriously into your own hands, then I need to educate my children Arabic. And so that means that I need to educate myself Arabic. Find ways to learn the Arabic language and further yourself, inshallah. I don't know if there's any final words from yourself, Moulana Ashraf.
No, like you just mentioned, never lose hope. To the youth as well. Remember, like what I mentioned last week, that no matter what you do, no matter how low you go, never lose hope. There's always someone out there who's willing to help you. And to the community, like Mufti Aamir has said, that to the eye it may seem that everything's going downhill, there's nothing going on, but alhamdulillah there are a lot of people making effort, and if you make a community effort, inshallah we will all see the benefits in the very, very near future, inshallah.
Preston is ahead of everybody else.
Alhamdulillah.
For now.
I think Mufti Aamir should come back to Preston.
No, it's not. I promise you, Allah finds means.
Definitely.
If a community takes it seriously, I'm telling you, no religion was built off a single person. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, the companions were in shock. It was like their world has just been shook, and everybody was running around. Umar radiallahu ta'ala is there pulling his sword out saying, I dare somebody to say that the Prophet has passed away. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala stood up and he said very simply that if you believed this religion and you believed Muhammad to be the God, he's passed away. Allah is the creator, and Allah mentions it. There's a hadith that mentions this. Allah will take the work of deen from a rajulun fajir and rajulun fasiq, a sinning individual as well. Allah doesn't need us, Allah doesn't need any one individual, but we make ourselves embodiments of the scholars. Push our intelligent children into the madaris, into the seminaries, let them become scholars, and really, I always argue this, put the cream of the crop of our community into the madaris. Let them become the scholars and let them become individuals who take this thing. But khair, inshallah, we wrap it up there. There's a lot of things to discuss. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us all to benefit. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever was said that was correct and true, allow us all to benefit. Subhanallah. Assalamu alaikum.